Now, I had my say at the top of the program about the United Nations' latest climate report and some of the activist and political idiocy still going on in this space. If you missed it, here's just a sample of what Extinction Rebellion, you know the group, here's what they've been up to in Canberra in recent times.
We do what it takes to. We don't damage property. I mean, we're damaging property now, because little bits of property. Yeah, they're not catastrophic bits of property. It can be washed off.
We have to act now. We have to act with courage and compassion, because nothing else has worked. The year is 2021. We are already seeing massive impacts of climate breakdown.
Courage and compassion, these people are nuts. It's disgraceful, isn't it? But these people get lots of encouragement from politicians. One classic one came up today from Green Senator Libya Thorpe. She tweeted hysterically today that this is a climate emergency, the planet is dying, and this government isn't doing anything about it. Frightening stuff, eh? But just in case you were worried that someone like this might one day practice what they preach, I thought we'd better remind you that it was only 3 months ago the same Senator Thorpe had taken to Twitter to boast about getting invited into the chairman's lounge by Qantas as she was flying to the mining centre of Mount Isa. I mean, perish the thought she'd fly economy or catch up on a Zoom call and reduce her own carbon footprint. This hypocrisy is just so predictable now, isn't it? How about what happened up on Martha's Vineyard off Massachusetts on the weekend, where there was a big 60th birthday bash for former President Barack Obama? The island's airport had a traffic jam, a jam of private jets from the millionaires and billionaires jetting in to celebrate with the man who once declared that his election was the moment the oceans would stop rising and the planet would begin to heal. I mean, have they no self-awareness whatsoever? Private jets for all these climate virtue signallers. The little people can pay the price for climate policies. Oh, well, the climate alarmists are out in force today, of course, because of that IPCC 6th report released globally overnight. This is the UN's Climate Science Bible, and I'm joined now by marine biologist Professor Peter Ridd. Peter, good to talk to you again. You've had a good look over this latest report. What stands out? What's the number one takeout from you from the IPCC's latest report?
Well, there's very little that's different in it from previous ones, but the big thing is it's one-sided and it presents no contradictory evidence to what they want. Essentially, it's like there's a trial of carbon dioxide for crimes against humanity, but there's only the prosecution case. We're not allowed to hear the defence. All the dissidents have been removed from the process. So we have essentially a process which is not trustworthy. We've really got to start to fund dissent on this matter.
Now, that's an interesting point. I think it's fascinating because I've read a lot of these reports over the years, not with your trained scientist's eye, of course, but in the early reports, of course, the IPCC was very upfront about the benefits from climate change. Now, say we get worse droughts in Australia, that's bad, but there are other parts of the world where a warmer climate was going to save lives, fewer people were going to die, or agriculture was going to improve because the countryside would be covered by snow for shorter periods and the like. But those sort of benefits are somehow erased from the equation now.
Yes, and that's what makes you think this whole thing is not really a proper scientific document, totally unbalanced. I mean, they just skirt over the fact that carbon dioxide is, the second most important thing for plants after water. And there's great evidence showing that the planet is actually greening, by up to 10% in the sub-Saharan Africa and in large parts of Australia. So why is this never mentioned? Why, for example, haven't we mentioned the absolutely fabulous news from the Great Barrier Reef, where we're showing record high coral covers in the last report? This despite supposedly having 3 massive bleaching events which devastated a whole lot of coral in the last 5 years. Why don't we see this good news in this report?
Are you saying that the Great Barrier Reef has been left out of the report because the news about it is good?
Well, there's almost nothing in apart from just a passing mention. They certainly mention corals and how they're all going to be gone in, I don't know, was it 30 or 40 years? 70% of them will be gone by then. But they don't actually mention in any detail what's actually going on the reef, which is that we're actually at record high coral covers. And in addition to that, the data suggests that coral growth rates have, if anything, increased in that time. They report work by those scientists who've shown that's increased on other things, but they don't report the work that the rate of growth of coral has actually increased in the last 100 years.
Now, the other thing, Peter, that I've noticed over the various iterations of this report, the other thing that's changed dramatically is where they used to say that global warming, up to half of global warming was caused by greenhouse gas emissions, human activity, and they would say that with some certainty. Now they declare that most of the warming we're seeing is caused by human activity, and they have greater certainty about that. So that's a big change. Now, is that backed up by scientific evidence, or is that a change in rhetoric?
I think it's a change in rhetoric. It's very difficult to know what bits of this report that you can trust. If there is fundamentally not a proper process which they've gone through, and that is absolutely patently obvious, then it's difficult to know which bits you can trust and which you can't trust. As I said, it's like a trial. It's like a trial in China. You know, sometimes they might get it right, but if you don't have a prosecution and defence, how can you tell? How can you have any confidence?
Now, another point, again, that doesn't go to whether their arguments are right or not, and it's the classic sort of boy who called wolf thing. I mean, even if you want to alert the public, has the IPCC done itself enormous damage by constantly referring to tipping points or deadlines for action, because they keep mentioning them, we pass by them and we're doing all right, and then they set another deadline. So now we're told in just over a decade, if we haven't done what they want, it's too late.
Yes, I think they have. And I think, you know, the older you are, the more of these, disastrous predictions have come and passed. And it's interesting, actually, a couple of years ago, there was a Pew Foundation study done on basically looking at how much people trusted scientists, especially environmental scientists. And it was really only at about 50%. And one interesting thing was that only 15% of the respondents in America said that they would trust the scientists to change their mind to admit to changing their mind when they've made a mistake. So there is actually a loss of faith in the institutions of science, which is a great shame.
Now, another matter that I don't think gets enough run in the Australian media, and it stands to good reason, obviously, even to those with limited science background, that if the world gets warmer, it also gets wetter. And that's, of course, what all the climate science says. Yet in Australia, we seem to always say it's going to get hotter and drier, hotter and drier. Surely the science shows that Australia also will get more precipitation, more flooding. That doesn't necessarily mean that some places might not be drier, I understand. But overall, what is the impact on Australia when it comes to water?
Well, I think it's actually quite difficult to say what the impact will be. I mean, they make some predictions. There should be more rainfall. They talk about drought. They just go on about that. If you look at the records, which you can actually take from coral reefs, there was a huge drought in the early 1800s, which is much bigger than anything we've seen in North Queensland, for instance. So these are more examples of things that have been missed. They go on about cyclone intensity. They forget that actually in America, for instance, the number of crossings of hurricanes has reduced in the last 50 years. And they also forget for Australia that by far the worst cyclone that happened on the Queensland coast was in 1898, when there was a tidal surge that went in, about 10 kilometres inland. If that happened in Cairns or Townsville today, it would actually kill tens of thousands of people, but that happened in 1898.
Peter, thanks so much for sharing your time with us. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Peter Ridd there, a marine biologist. It's fascinating to talk about all this. Now, this is not climate denial. This is scepticism. We all should be sceptical about all science, but there's so much to debate in this space. So much on the science front, so much on the policies front. But you have a look around the media the next couple of days. All you'll get is, we're all going to die, the planet's being cooked. It honestly is that brainless.